Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Kent City Council Committee of the Whole meeting. Today is Tuesday, July 28th, 2020, and I would like to welcome everyone that is joining us. This is Council President Tony Troutner. This is a remote meeting due to the COVID-19 coronavirus emergency. So we are broadcasting live on TV 21, also the City of Kent Facebook page, and you can watch us on the YouTube Kent TV 21 channel. We have several things on the agenda today that require action and some information only. So Kim, to get us started, would you please do the roll call?
Thank you, Council President Troutner. Council President Troutner.
Here.
Councilmember Boyce.
Here.
Councilmember Fincher.
Here.
Councilmember Kaur.
Here.
Councilmember Larmer.
Here.
Councilmember Michaud.
Here.
Councilmember Thomas.
Here.
And thank you, Mayor, for attending our meeting today also.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. Before we move on in the agenda, I would like everyone to join me and take a moment of silence to pay our respects to the late Congressman John Lewis. Congressman Lewis was on the front lines of civil rights movement, fighting for a more perfect union. He is an example of a leader who led with heart, conviction, and the idea that America should live up to its promise. He passed multiple pieces of landmark legislation to ensure that promise would become law for future generations. He will forever rightfully own a place in American history. He is an American hero and will be remembered as such. I'd also like to thank Mayor Ralph for ordering flags be flown at half-staff and to his burial to honor his legacy and his life. Thank you so much. Looking to council, administration, and staff, are there any changes to the agenda?
None from staff this afternoon.
All right, thank you so much. We will move on and get started with our department presentations. And the first up is the South 228th Street UPRR grade separation RailPros field service amendment number 2.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Madfai, Design Engineering Supervisor with the city. The next item is amendment number 2 for a contract with RailPros Field Services for the South 228th Street Railroad Grade Separation Project. RailPros is performing the railroad flagging for this project to ensure railroad traffic is not impeded by construction. They are also the only company approved by the Union Pacific Railroad to perform flagging on their tracks. This amendment will allow the flagging to continue at least through the end of the year, when we anticipate the bridge to be constructed and barriers and safety fencing are installed on the bridge. At that point, the railroad will allow us to discontinue the flagging. More flagging hours were required as the railroad required flaggers to be on site for more of the project. Also, the project is extended due to COVID. But now the contractor is working full steam and girders are set to be installed next week. So that's all I have, unless there are any questions.
Are there any questions or comments about this? All right, I don't see any hands raised. So is everyone okay moving this forward to the consent calendar? Are there any objections? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on in the agenda, we have an information only item. This is on the Small Business Grant Program. So Bill, go ahead and share your presentation.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you, Council. I am here, yes, to give a update on the Small Business Emergency Relief Grant. First slide, please, Kim. So we announced this today. Eligibility criteria. We've relaxed the requirements and we've extended the application. In the strike through in red, 2 pieces of information, feedback we've been receiving from the business community during the previous 2 weeks that we've had the application intake was that was too onerous was the requirement to have not received any other forms of federal or state aid, and the 3 years in business prior to COVID-19 happening. I'll have more on this in a moment when we get into the statistics, but the most important thing for the public to know who might be watching at this moment is that you can still apply, and you can apply online at kentwa.gov/business grant. Our new closing date will be Sunday, August 9th at 8 p.m. All of the other previous eligibility that you see up there remains consistent and constant. Next slide, please. So where does this put us in the timeline? So extending from July 27th to August 9th, I will say, does not impact our target date for awards being given out. We are not adjusting our desire to notify winning applicants on August 17th. So there will be no delay to those who've already applied for money, who are eligible and selected for money will receive the funds no later due to this extension of the timeline. We are still working to approve Craft 3's review panel selection method. We're going to do that prior to closing of the application intake. We've seen some draft material on that. We would be prioritizing those who have not received aid previously. We would be prioritizing businesses from historically underrepresented groups, including Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as women-owned businesses and veteran-owned businesses. But we will not finalize that selection methodology until we close the application intake. Right now, we're extending application intake from July 27th until August 9th, and this will not delay anyone receiving funds. Next slide, please. So statistics so far. As of this morning, we had 220 applications. From a short glance, not full diagnostic, we haven't thoroughly vetted the pile of applications so far, but it appeared that 87 appeared eligible. Receiving other assistance, primarily federal aid, was the #1 reason for ineligibility. I'll have more to say on this in a moment, but this was something of a surprise to us, although earlier survey information did say that a lot of Kent businesses had received other federal aid. I will say that we weren't sure exactly how many people had received, for instance, an emergency loan from the SBA. That hadn't been published or released by the federal government. So our highest priority in the initial crafting of the eligibility was one based upon the guidance of Department of Commerce at the time, which was regarding trying to avoid issues of federal supplanting or giving federal funds twice to the same entity. There's been an evolving guidance from Department of Commerce as we've had the application process open, and I think we have a work around on that to help those who may have gotten just a small amount from the federal government so far. That's been the #1 reason for ineligibility, and that's in contrast to other grant programs that we've been looking at. Other communities, the #1 reason would be confusion as to what jurisdiction they've been in, or other grant programs have had a large number rejected on the basis of the number of years that they were open. For us, that was a much smaller reason. That was maybe only 10% so far that we were looking at that weren't meeting the criteria of eligibility. After that would be a familiar relationship with the City of Kent employee would be another ineligible reason. But the largest reason so far has been the federal criteria. 46 of the applicants indicated that they received technical assistance in making application, so about a quarter, a little under that. So on the right hand of your screen there, I just want to thank all of our community partners, and Michelle Wilmot has been working mightily to coordinate and communicate with a diverse panoply of organizations and individuals who are working very hard to make sure that the word is known about the grant program, answer questions about it, and in some cases, help them fill it out. So 46 of the applicants mentioned someone from the right, and for those who've been helping who aren't affiliated with an organization, thank you to you as well. 50 have also indicated a language preference other than English, which I take as some indication that our special outreach in terms of translation and technical help assistance in those language groups is bearing fruit in terms of the applications received. So thank you to all of our partners. Next slide, please. Something I'd like to inform council of tonight is that the city would be putting forward an additional $500,000 in CARES Act dollars from the Department of Commerce. This is on top of the $1 million already provided and the $200,000 from King County to increase award size amounts. The new award size amounts will be determined and announced by tomorrow afternoon. Grant may remain competitive. By that, I mean there might have to be, besides the eligibility criteria sort, there would also need to be selection criteria sort, or like selection priority costing after the fact, depending on total of eligible businesses who submit applications. As COVID-19 interruptions and enforced partial closures extend longer, it's appropriate to increase the award size amounts. I have there in parentheses expense reimbursement, because I think one of the, or not think, one of the ways that we have found a way to get federal assistance to businesses who may have achieved federal help before is that they promise and attest that they will use it for reimbursing different expenses than they have previously received. So that's a technicality. There will be no verification on that beyond the attestation of the business owner. So that's how we are relaxing that eligibility criteria. And that is something that has evolved since we opened the application intake and why we're extending it. As to the amount of the award size, maybe some quick calculator work can tell you that at our previous award size, which we will not decrease, but we would only increase, $4,500 per application. Applicant would be roughly 800,000 plus. So we're looking somewhere between 4,500 and 7,000. We're going to be looking at projections of how many applications we'll receive by the end and making an announcement tomorrow. Again, I think the dollar amount increasing really is something that's changed as we're looking at partial closures and sort of the phases continuing longer than from perhaps just even a couple months ago. So as the disruption increases, I think it is sensible for us to now increase the size of granting awards. With that, next slide. One last thing. I do want to mention that the manufacturing employee retention program that we are funding, in part $200,000 from Department of Commerce CARES Act funding, and in part from City of Kent's matching grant, $32,000 and $65,000 from Port of Seattle, for a grand total of $300,000. That launched. We are in the midst of outreach. We are helping at least 30 plus individuals and employees so far, and I will be getting another update at the end of this week. So that is also a program that's underway. With that, next slide. Questions on anything I've just gone over, you can go back to the previous slides.
Thank you, Bill, for sharing those statistics. I think that some of us have been looking forward to seeing some of those numbers. Councilmember Boyce, do you have a question or a comment?
I do have a question. Thank you, Madam Chair. And Bill, I apologize. I had an urgent work call. I had to get off about a minute. But could you go back to your first page where you show how many people apply? Oh, I'm sorry. Go back. How many people applied? Applicant you showed?
Yeah, as of this morning, 220.
And you say roughly how many by eyeball? How many they may qualify for it?
87.
Wow. And why is that?
The large number of people who had applied had also been receiving other primarily federal reasons. So bullet number 3 there, those had received SBA assistance. So that was something that took me a little bit by surprise too. We have a very large percentage of people applying for funds, despite that it was stated that you would be ineligible if you already had received federal aid. A large percentage of our applicants applied anyways after and saying, forthrightly that they had received other federal aid. So we're rejecting almost half of our application pool, primarily because they've already received some form of SBA assistance. A large percentage of those we've heard were people who were getting early on in the very early days of the closures, idle loan amounts, disaster award amounts of $1,000 or $1,500, not enough perhaps to the length of closure. So we heard that feedback, and Department of Commerce has been hearing it from others as well. And there's been sort of a red tape evolving discussion as to how you would make eligible and avoid supplanting concerns with state auditor's office and others.
Yeah, that was my next question. It didn't matter of the size. I got a small whole loan for $100. That make me ineligible? What you're saying too?
Yeah, I mean, if you had any federal dollars whatsoever, what it could create was a situation where, let's say you had $1,000 in idle, and then we just had a blanket, no federal. If you had any other federal assistance for your business, you weren't now eligible for $44,500 from the City of Kent, because we are sourcing that funding from the U.S. Treasury, and that's to avoid issues of supplanting. Right. To elaborate further, if one of the things that have been evolving in the background here is in the discussion with the state was the question of, do businesses have to then supply receipts as to what expenses that they are being reimbursed for were COVID-19 impacts or not? And then could you show that those receipts were not the same receipts that you put towards the EIDL program versus the City of Kent's CARES Act program?
Right.
This is a lot of paperwork and logistically daunting. So we're working around that through an attestation of the business and avoiding some of those issues. And there's been communication with the state auditor's office in advance. That is how we can do this, so that we could try to keep this application process as simple as possible. We didn't want to necessarily have everyone submit taxes and receipts and try to collect receipts after the fact. So that was one of the reasons why in a triage setting, we had the eligibility criteria say no federal aid. Previously, if we've also been hearing that people hadn't been getting aid.
I guess it's also possible that 87 number could go down too, right? I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think so. That's why I say short glance, not full diagnostic. I mean, there's other things. So if you just did a quick scans on it and said, all right, how many people just clicked that they had already received aid of the 220 who applied? That's the number you have. But yes, you're correct. You could go further, but probably not drastically.
So one last question, and thank you so much. So let's assume that only 40 qualify, right? So do we get that funding and all 40 would get that funding no matter what? Or how would that work?
Yeah. We would only apply the prioritization of selecting of the pile. So let's say we, $44,500 is the grand size award, which we've promised already. Right. And that's enough for 200 businesses, and we only had 160. That means the selection criteria never comes into play. But we're extending now, and we're putting forward additional dollars. So we could, depending on how many people also didn't apply because they read the criteria and said, well, this doesn't apply for me. I would imagine the application pool will now grow over the between now and August 9th. And those eligible will increase greatly, closer to 150, 160 just today by relaxing that criteria alone. Right. We'll be closer to that 200 figure. And then the question becomes a balancing act between number of businesses versus how much awards additional per business.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it, buddy. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So we've got some hands raised. I'm going to start with Councilmember Larmer, then we will go to Councilmember Kaur, then Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you, Council President. So Bill, remind me, what is the eligibility requirement around number of employees?
Number of employees? You go back to slide, Kim, to the first slide. Another
15.
Go back.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is that, are we getting any feedback? I mean, this 15 sound, is it coming back as reasonable, or would we
that has not
getting any feedback that we need to increase it to 20 or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
I think all the feedback's been about 3 years versus 2 in the federal, mostly the vast majority is the federal aid.
Okay.
It's been very strongly clear the feedback note we're getting back on the federal aid piece. So we are responding to that. And thankfully, at the same time, there's been this evolving guidance over the rules of how we can use the funding that backs up that direction.
Thanks.
Councilmember Kaur.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill, for the presentation and the update. I really appreciate the change on federal and state aid because I heard that feedback as well. My question is about language access. So the nonprofits you had on the slide, are those the ones that are helping fill out applications? And is there other ways we're reaching out to the community to let them know that they have resources available in different languages?
Yes. So those are the ones you have there, some of them not exhaustive, but yes, that's how we're trying to reach out to them. These organizations have people in the community or people with language help. So we're relying heavily upon these community partnerships and those through KC Diggs and elsewhere to get the word out, one, and then have the on-call numbers of these people who stood forward and said that they would help. And we're also compensating them for their time to help applications get filled out, if that's the preferred language. I have some additional detailed information as to how many applications from the different language groups, if interested, amongst the 46.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And also, if you can maybe kind of give us an idea of how many possibly BIPOC residents applied for, or business owners applied for the grant, and I guess I'll, if you
Yeah, I'm
have that
pulling up the number of
information.
languages right now, but we had about 11 Vietnamese. Now, I should also note that just because someone put their preferred language as something other than English doesn't mean that someone has another language spoken primarily in their home. But so there might be a higher number than 46.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. That's all my questions.
Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you, Madam President. So with the number who have not qualified, are we sending them notice as to why they didn't qualify and to let them know why they were dropped out as you go through this process? Bill? Hello?
Looks like we lost Bill for a minute, but I just...
Sorry, I lost the connection there.
Did you need me to repeat the question?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I lost connection as I was calling up for Councilmember Core. I was pulling up from the depths of the internet my own file of the PowerPoint for the number of languages broken out, and it kicked me off.
Okay. For the applicants who do not make it through the process, are we letting them know that that they're not and why they are not?
Yes, there's a letter drafted for that, but we haven't gotten to that stage yet.
Okay.
We haven't gone through thoroughly. This is a first glance look. But that
right. I was wondering, as they go through the process and as they do, you find out someone isn't, so they're not kept waiting.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Now, Bill, I think you said this was just a pause for questions. Do you have more slides to continue with?
No, I do not have more slides. I was calling up the number of by different language, the preferred applications. I believe we had 4 Punjabi, 11 Spanish, 11 Vietnamese, 20 Spanish speakers. We had a few other listed, including Japanese. We have still applications from the Russian community. So we have a variety of different languages. Tagalog applicants have filled out, but we are by no means done. And I don't think, again, that someone checking that is an indication entirely. But sorry, I had lost connection right when I was answering Councilmember Carr, so I don't know if I missed any other question or if that satisfies the question for
That was it so far. Does anyone else have any additional questions for Bill? All right, I don't see any hands raised. Will we hear back from you again with additional statistics as we move through this process?
Yeah, I think you will hear from me next on this, probably on August 17th, unless I hear differently from Derek at a different committee of the whole meeting or council report. I will definitely report back out. But we're extending, right, as I said, between now and August 9th. And we hope to help all those who we can help and do so at a level of funding that is meaningful for those who are selected.
Great, thank you so much. But I appreciate you and your team, all you're doing to help the small businesses in our community. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Moving on in the presentation, it looks like information only on the CARES Act Community Development Block Grant. So welcome, I believe, is it Merina that's presenting?
Hi, this is Merina. I'm going to briefly introduce it, and then I will actually be handing it over to Dinah Wilson, who is our Senior CDBG Coordinator in Human Services. I really just wanted to take a brief moment to express my thanks to Dinah for the efforts that have gone into this process. I think you've probably all heard me say at different times that CDBG is really challenging work, and that would be kind of the understatement of this century as we've navigated the CDBG-CV funds. Timing, how it all worked out, we ended up having to layer an additional application process on top of a pandemic, on top of a normal human services application process. So it has been very time consuming, very challenging to try to stay a couple steps ahead of HUD as they have been very slow to release guidance on how we utilize these funds, but have also been telling us that we need to hurry up and be prepared to expend the funds. So it's definitely been tricky. And I just wanted to let you guys know that, you know, I'm really proud of the process that we went through. There are many other jurisdictions that chose to, in light of everything that everyone's going through, just do an internal process and decide at a staff level where the funds for their respective cities would be allocated. And while that was probably easier on many levels, we just didn't feel that that was the right way to go about it in Kent. And so even though it was a lot of extra time and effort, we really wanted to make sure that we connected with the community on what they felt the needs for our residents and for our organizations, what those needs really were. So it took some time to run a process and it took some time to hear from the community, but I think that we did a good job in doing that. And that's really down to all the effort that Dinah has put into it with the help of Uriel and Caitlin in our office and some volunteers from the community. And I'll let Dinah talk more about that, but I just wanted to make sure that we express that for you all to hear this evening as well. So I'll be here to answer questions as well, but I'm going to turn it over to Dinah.
Thank you, Merina. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll tell you more about our process, and it was a long process, but we're finally at the point where we're ready to negotiate our contracts with organizations who will receive these funds. As you know, this money is from our CARES Act. We received notice in March that we would receive these funds, and the city received $670,541 in the CARES Act funds to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. We call it Community Development Block Grant CV, CDBG-CV, the CV standing for coronavirus. We also thought this was a good opportunity to add some funds that we had that were unallocated over the last few years, mainly because we're often a few months behind in our capital funding. And so we added $184,948 in unallocated funds to grow this funding budget to $721,381. We are also deducting under the federal requirements, we're allowed to deduct up to 20% in planning and administration. And we've always, through the years, taken the full amount for planning and administration. We use most of that for salaries and also planning processes. Next slide, please. And as Merina said, we use a similar process to the way we allocate our other human services funds. We really thought it was important to open this up to the community and hear from the community what the priority needs were to prevent, respond to, and prepare for coronavirus. So we decided to, make sure that subrecipients were still participants and partners with us in how we deliver these funds. We've always tried to be transparent in that process and include our stakeholders and our residents and our community. And we decided, based on what we heard, and we'll talk a little more about that later, but we are using these funds for public service activities, which is usually the main way community development block grants are spent in all throughout the country. And we use you can only use normally up to 15% of your funds for public services. But because of this pandemic, the government allowed us to not have that cap on our public services. So we took advantage of that by putting most of the money into public services. And also we put some money into micro enterprise projects. Next slide. we wanted to tell you a little bit about how we received feedback before we decided on which organizations would receive these funds or which activities to fund. We surveyed nonprofits, the Cultural Communities Board, Kent Cultural Diversity Initiative Group, residents, stakeholders, and asked them what were the most pressing needs that they saw in the community in responding to coronavirus. And then once we received that feedback from them, we developed a list of activities to fund. For example, food and rental and utility assistance were at the top of the list, homeless services, healthcare services, micro enterprise, trauma counseling, COVID-related supplies, and also digital services were some of the activities that we said we would fund. But we also said in our application, if there was something we missed, you can let us know. So we had another category that organizations could add to the activities. We also have been in close communication with our economic development staff and especially talking about the need to put funds into small businesses and just coordinating this, what impact was the coronavirus having on small business. So we provided a $2,000 grant to our economic development division so that we could learn more about what was happening to our small businesses. Next slide, please. The process is that after we received that feedback, we held a public hearing. Again, because of the pandemic, the rules for holding a public hearing were more flexible. We didn't have to have our normal 30-day comment period. And so we held a truncated hearing based on what was allowed. And once that happened, we released a notice of funding availability. And we also created a community development block grant CV application so that organizations or sub-recipients could apply for the funds. It was a 3-page application. It was really important for us to make it as easy, as simple as possible. I'd say a quarter of the applications was just a check box, and just contact information and making sure that organizations had the ability to contract with the city. So the substantive part of the application was probably 1.5 pages. And we did receive feedback that it was easy to complete. And we also took questions from organizations. We posted the responses to those questions on our website, as well as emailing organizations back with the answers so that everyone could see what questions were being asked. And we could share that information and be transparent about that. So one organization wasn't getting access to something or a response to a question that the other couldn't receive. Then we convened a review panel. Happy to say that panel also included one of our human services commissioners. And the commission decided this is the way they wanted to handle this. We were also in the middle, I think Merina mentioned, human services, larger grants, and we, there was a lot going on at the same time, trying to figure out how this worked with HUD and also, juggling another funding process. So we didn't want to overly burden our Human Services Commission, and they decided that we would go with this panel, and one of the members of the commission, as I said, was on the panel. So they reviewed the applications and then would give the recommendations to the Human Services Commission. I think we received 30 applications. We had 30 applications for these grants, but when you look at the fact that we allowed organizations to apply for up to 2 activities, we probably had like over 70 applications for these funds. We had requests for $2.44 million, and you saw that the grant was only a little over 721,000. So much more than we could respond to, or we knew that some organizations would not be able to receive the grant. The Human Services Commission approved our funding recommendations on July the 16th, and authorized and we also brought this before you to approve. So that's where we are. Was that the last slide? I think it was. Any questions? that I can answer.
So questions for Dinah. Member Voice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hey, Donna, thanks for the presentation. So out of those 21 application, are any of those repeatable people who've been through this similar process before, that had?
Yes.
How many of those, what percentage of those do you know?
Yeah, we actually received 30 applications. I would say probably, at least a quarter or more were organizations that had gone through our funding process before, and some of whom we already fund through our general human services and CDBG funding. So we had some of those larger organizations, like, for example, Catholic Community Services, Kent Youth and Family Services, Multi-Service Center, the Y, some of those larger organizations that we're all familiar with. But we also had a lot of new applicants, which was great because we're always trying to reach out to organizations that may not know about our funding. So we had a lot of applications from smaller organizations, some of which we had never heard of before.
Well, that's good. And then my other question, I probably should answer, but I don't. So do they have to report back to you guys on how they use the grant for us? I mean, or any accountability or what was done?
Absolutely. That's the one thing that is really a factor in, who we decide to fund, because HUD requires lots of paperwork. We track outcomes. We need to know the number served. So the scopes of work are very specific to allow us to track that information. And at some point, I think we want to report back to you and let you know outcomes. But yes, they do have to report back to us on a quarterly basis.
Well, thank you. You do a wonderful job this year. So I can only imagine, but really appreciate you having you on the team. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned that at some point it might be important for you to report back how those funds were used by different organizations. And I think that would be really interesting information for us to see. Any other questions or comments? All right. I don't see any hands raised.
I have a question. Sorry.
Councilmember Clark.
Hi. Thank you, Dinah, for the great presentation and all the work you do in your team. One of the questions was about reporting back, but the other one is are there any restrictions for the organizations that are applying on how they can use the funds, as in administrative fees, and can they use this for administrative fees? I mean, this is grants, but
yeah, we're trying to keep the fees very low because we really want this to go directly to residents as much as possible. But yes, they can ask for a small amount of administrative fees, because then they can ask to pay for personnel costs, because some of them obviously you can't deliver the services without staff. So a lot of them kept their costs really low, and we're about to negotiate the contracts. And if anyone asks for we feel are very high fees, we'll negotiate that down with them.
Okay, and when can we expect to see the list of organizations and funding they're receiving?
We informed everyone yesterday, so we're ready to release that now, so we can get that to you immediately.
That would be great, because I'd like to see.
I think what we'll do, we can post it to our website. Would that work?
Oh yeah, that'd be great. I mean, that would be great. I think our residents should know where our funding grants are going and who they can reach out to if they need some support. So thank you.
Okay, we'll post it to our website, and then we'll send a link to you as well. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much. We will move on the agenda.
Thank you.
This next up on the agenda is the use of CARES grant funding to update technology. So Mr. Endicott.
Thank you, Council President. This is James Endicott, Technical Services Manager with the IT Department. In early March, and in consideration of COVID-19 pandemic, the executive leadership team had requested that IT work to facilitate a work from home for city staff. During our initial planning, it was very clear that we would not have enough laptops to cover the entire city staff. So we had to kind of think outside the box, and because we have a desktop computer heavy fleet, we have about 900 total computers in the city, and of that, 600 are currently desktops and 300 roughly are laptops. We were kind of in a position where we had to think again outside the box. So we came up with the solution of installing NetMotion, which is our virtual private network to get back to the city. We installed that on approximately 300 desktop computers, and the users took their full computers, monitor, keyboards, and mouse home to facilitate being able to work. This is normally prohibited because of the security, but because of extraordinary times, we looked at extraordinary measures. Due to the lack of mobility and really increased security, this was not something that was going to be practical for long term. So in light of COVID and potential for similar disruptive events, it is IT's recommendation to move to a laptop-centric fleet. By doing so, the city would really be in a position to better respond and be prepared, flexibility for our users, portability of the equipment, as well as mobility. This procurement will include approximately 500 laptops, 500 docking stations, 3-year warranty, additional VPN licensing, and additional wireless infrastructure to support the additional machines, with a total estimate of just over $1 million. In addition, IT anticipates it will need to retain 4 outside contractors for an approximate 800 total hours to roll out the new laptops, with an estimated cost of about $36,000. The total project cost for this laptop replacement project is estimated to be $1,037,687, which can be fully paid for by utilizing the CARES Act funding the city received. In addition, IT staff seeks approval to purchase additional products through the cooperative purchasing agreement with Microsoft, so long as those future purchases can be made within established budgets. Any questions?
Thank you, James. Any questions, Councilmember Boyce?
Thank you, Council President. First of all, I just said, when I read this here, I was so ecstatic, right? And I'm glad Derek and the mayor had the foresight. I mean, taking a laptop home, you're gonna find out that your organization will be a lot more efficient. You're gonna get a lot more work done, you know, and I witnessed this for myself and my own staff. So this is really a good thing for the city, and I am really ecstatic that we are moving this direction, because we don't know how long this virus stuff is going to be around, and we want to make things easy as possible for our employees to be able to get their work done, and if that means doing it at home, then so be it. So I think you're going to find out from a productivity standpoint, you're going to see an increased productivity from your employees. So I was just really happy to see this here. I did have a question earlier from Mike and James around why Minnesota, but they answered that question for me as a co-op, so I'm okay with that. So I just want to say kudos to the organization, the mayor, Derek, and everybody. You're going to find out this is going to be a really big plus for the city. So just a comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Weiss. Councilmember Larmer.
Yeah, I just really want to echo, what Councilmember Bruce was saying. When I first read the numbers and realized how desktop dependent we were, I was a little surprised. I have not had a desktop in a workplace since 2008, I think. So I think we are long overdue for this mobility, and it will be a huge business unlock, because it's not just the business continuity during disasters or viruses, but there's, I remember times when my children were little and something would happen at night and I was available the next day, but I was stuck at home with them. But I had my laptop, I could actually work, even though I had to be at home for that particular day. So there's a lot of benefits to this, and I'm just really thrilled that we have the money to do it and make this move. So that's it.
Thank you, Councilmember Larmer. I think you've heard some great comments from colleagues that how important this really is to move us forward. And Thank you again to the entire IT department and everyone that worked really hard in a very short amount of time to get our employees to be able to work from home and to be able to stay safe and keep their families safe during something that we'd never experienced before. So I completely support this as well. Any other questions or comments from my colleagues? All right, not seeing any hands raised or any mics off. I'm hoping there's no issues with moving this forward to the consent calendar. Are there any objections? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Moving on in the agenda, next we have payments of bills. That comes to council members to look through and moves directly to the consent calendar. So we will move on to information only, the 2020-2021 property insurance renewal with Chris Hills. Welcome. I see that Chris is on the call.
Like he's on mute. There you go.
Sorry.
There we go. Welcome.
The little notice was a little late coming up there. No worries. Hello, this is Chris Hills. I'm the risk manager for the city, and I'll take a few minutes to share with you some information about our property insurance renewal for the 2020-21 policy period. As you've heard during past presentations I've made about the insurance market, specifically in January, the liability update, and then last July for the 2019-2020 property renewal, the market continues to harden, meaning that insurers continue to see trends that have them adjusting their market strategies to regain some profitability due to operating losses in recent years. In 2017, it was a very bad year for the property market. There were 3 significant hurricanes and some significant wildfires in California. And then in 2018, even worse wildfires in California. So some of the steps that insurers are taking include that they're limiting capacity, which we saw with last year's renewal, and you'll see further affects our program this year. And then just overall increases in coverage costs to insurers as the price of the cost of reinsurance continues to go up. So with that background, though, I would say that Kent is a very good risk for property insurers. We have an excellent loss history. We did have the arson loss at the Lake Meridian restrooms in 2018. And then prior to that, the only other loss we've had of late was another arson fire at the West Hill Park restrooms back in 2012. So a really good loss history. And so insurers do want to do business with us. It's just that often their costs continue to go up. So our program consists of we heard from our broker, Alliant Insurance Services. They marketed our program. And in June, they presented us with options for coverage and pricing for this year. In order to maintain the overall level of our property program, our options for pricing were limited to really altering the limits of our earthquake and flood coverage, which we've done in the past. I worked with Chief Administrative Officer Derek Matheson, Finance Director Paula Painter, Finance Department staff, and HR Director Terry Smith. We convened a meeting and with our broker and evaluated the options that we were presented with, which ranged from maintaining our current level of earthquake and flood coverage, which is $35 million, which would have resulted in an overall increase of 30% in our premiums, to decreasing that flood and earthquake coverage down to about 15 million, which would have been an increase of about 8%. The finance department had already projected a budget increase for the property fund, which allowed us to choose the option of lowering earthquake and flood coverage to $25 million. That level keeps our earthquake coverage above what the projected maximum loss for Kent would be in the event of an earthquake. It's called a projected maximum loss. There are some industry models about earthquake modeling, which is projected at $17 million. The resulting increase for that level of coverage is 22%, which is 22% above the 2019-2020 premium, but only slightly above the increase projected by the finance department. Kim, could you please put up the chart? So this chart then represents the program that was in place for the 2019-2020 policy on the left and the 2021 program on the right. I'd like to point out the key differences in the two programs. So in the dark blue towers on the left in each, you'll note that last year, Lexington had the entire first layer of 25 million, and that this year, that same layer is being shared by 3 insurers in equal parts. Note also that the cost of that layer alone increased from $265,000 last year to $352,000 this year, which is a 32% increase. In the light blue tower, so the right-hand side of each of the charts, you'll note only that the earthquake and flood limit has decreased from that $35 million we had last year down to $25 million. You'll also see in the notes that the overall value of Kent property increased by 2%. So we maintain, I maintain an inventory of all the property that we insure. And oftentimes that property value will go up because the cost of construction does increase each year. And we had a 2% increase in the value of our buildings this year. So at this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about our property insurance program renewal.
Great, thank you, Chris. Any questions or comments? All right, I'm not seeing anybody with their hands raised.
All right, thank you very much.
Councilmember Boyce, sorry, did you have your mic on?
Yeah, I was trying to hit the button here. So Chris, I was looking at, we got different, when I was looking at the presentation for different categories for things being decreased, some being increased, decreased. Overall, where are we when you look at it from a holistic approach?
Well, our coverage, the amount of coverage we have on any buildings stays exactly the same. We have a total loss amount of $150 million, and that amount is chosen primarily based on showware, which has a value of slightly over $100 million. The difference, as I mentioned earlier, is really the decrease in the overall amount of earthquake and flood coverage, which is available this year in this new policy as compared to last year. And that's the form of coverage that we have either increased or decreased over the years based on what the market has allowed us to do. So again, in this case, to stay within budget, we have chosen to decrease the amount of earthquake and flood coverage by $10 million from 35 last year to 25 this year. And that really allowed us to accommodate the overall premium increase for the $150 million worth of coverage.
Okay, I get it. So one follow-up. So when I look at this, so you look at like a 7% increase because the reinsurance in California, you got a 23% due to severe loss in California, another 22% for the volatility of reinsurance market. So are we in a market? I mean, we're not gonna see a big fire here. So are we in a market with California, and that's how we look at this all as one bucket, and we get impacted by this year, or how did that work?
Well, essentially, yes, that's true. Property insurers have customers all over the world, essentially, certainly all around the United States, so that when a massive loss occurs, like the fire that destroyed the city of Paradise, California, and millions of dollars in loss payments are made, that ultimately affects the other customers of those insurers all over the country and all over the world, even though we may not have had a loss during that same time period.
Gotcha. Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Great questions. Any other questions or comments? All right. I think that ends that presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our agenda. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Take care, and we are adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Good night.